there, Buttercups. Your resident Teabelle here. Welcome to Hark, 'tis the Teabelle. Let's dive in for that tea today, huh? Welcome back, Buttercups. I know y'all went 3 weeks without a proper episode, but I'm here today to make up for that. This week, we are diving deep into a movie that shows us that it isn't always a bad thing to have a childlike innocence as we journey through life. This movie should remind us that we have something that may try to hold us back, but with the right support, we can succeed, even beyond what we think is success. There's a lot of movies out there, and if you haven't guessed, well, I'll tell you. We're going to be discussing the movie Forrest Gump. Now, please note, this movie was made in a time that has some vibes, some words, some things that may not be tolerated today like it was then. But I'm not going to be discussing or bringing those up a lot unless it's very, very necessary. Okay? We're dissecting the movie in my own way. So, let's go ahead and get on with it. I cannot wait to start this episode. Director Robert Zemeckis, with writers Winston Groom and Eric Roth, stars Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, and Gary Sinise to bring to life a movie chock full of life lessons, officially released in 1994. As the movie starts, we see a white feather floating. It's floating through the air as we see our beloved Savannah, Georgia come into view. The feather takes its time as the credits roll to fall by the feet of a man in a pair of well-worn running shoes and a suit and a crew cut. He's sitting on a bench in a Chippewa Square, which we know due to Google, with a suitcase by his side. Now, before we even get to know who he is, before he introduces himself, we can clearly see that there's something optimistic about him. He's different, but we don't know why just yet. Now, the contrast is made even more clear when a woman sits down with a book next to him. Her body language is aloof as he begins to introduce himself. He offers her a chocolate, and we hear for the first time the phrase, "Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." Now, she is clearly not interested. She's not wanting to entertain a conversation with a stranger as he continues to have this conversation, right? When she finally responds with a definitely justified, slightly annoyed, but polite tone, "My feet hurt." Forrest takes no offense as he launches into his first pair of shoes. Now, what would be so significant about a pair of shoes? Your first pair of shoes, right? We find out. Now we're at a doctor's office where the doctor states about Forrest. "His legs are strong, Mrs. Gump, strong as I ever seen, but his back is as crooked as a politician." This is just one of the many obstacles he has given in his life, but it's one of the first obstacles he has given in his young life, because now he needs leg braces. Now, Forrest, we learn that his name comes from a relative who founded the Ku Klux Klan, and Mama Bear named him that for a reason. He needed to learn that sometimes we do things that don't make no sense. Now, speaking of Mama Bear, we all need his mama in our life. And she is going to be called Mama Bear because, in true Mama Bear fashion, she reinforces that there is not a thing wrong with her baby. Don't ever let anybody tell you that they're better than you, Forrest. If God intended everyone to be the same, he'd have given us all braces on our legs. Bless you, Sally Field. I know you did that line better than I did. Now, Mama Bear, we will learn, is a single mom, but she is making sure she takes care of her baby. And how does she do that? She runs a successful boarding home. Now, some people talk the talk, but this mama, she walks the walk. We also learned that Forrest has an IQ of 70. Now, this is just a mere 5 points off of what is considered normal or the state minimum requirement. Now, when she's sitting in this office, she knows she has two choices. She can either accept the school's ruling or she can challenge it, do what she has to do. Now, do we have to guess what she did? We're talking about 5 little points here. There must be something can be done. Now, tactics are changed, y'all, and Mama Bear is given a choice. She knows immediately what she's going to have to do when she is asked, "Is there Mr. Gump? Mrs. Gump?" Now, we know what that means, okay? We really do. And so does she. Luckily, Forrest does not know what that means, okay? But he does mimic the noises he hears when that man is leaving the boarding house. And later, Forrest reminds Mama Bear that he does hear the things around him. And how do we know this? He asks her what a vacation is. "Mama, what's a vacation?" And so she's a little confused at first, going, "What?" And he says, "Where Daddy went." And now she's got to answer him in a way that he can understand, right? And this is the most honest way that she can answer in the situation. Vacations, when you go somewhere and you don't ever come back. Y'all, the resignation in her voice as she is saying this is heartbreaking. Because now the question is, why did his dad leave? Did his dad leave because his son maybe wasn't what he wanted? Was his dad just that cruel of a person? We don't know. But something we will learn as we watch this movie is that the point of view that we get from Forrest in his, how do I note this? How do I say this? The point of view we get from him as he encounters so many interesting events in his life is super interesting because we will come across Elvis Presley. Now, for those of you who watched it or haven't watched it for the first time, I adore the way that they don't really stay on the actor who plays Elvis Presley too long, but they do blur it enough so that you have this experience of feeling like it could really be him if you didn't know better. Okay? That's just my feeling anyways. Now, he is a young, impressionable boy. He's innocent, and he's trying to find his way through life with these leg braces, y'all. Well, the thing is that he's getting into the music as Elvis is playing, and he's doing a dance which isn't all that terrible. Okay? Now, it's all done in good fun, right? But when Forrest is doing it, it doesn't have any, there's no significance of it being anything but a young boy having a good time, right? The irony here is that this is what should remind us that we all convey different vibes, even if the same thing is being done. Because later, as Forrest and his mama are coming home from doing some shopping, he is seen on a TV screen in a shop doing the same moves as Elvis, okay? Or Forrest. So Elvis is doing what Forrest was doing. And Mama Bear is scandalized. Right? Which is hilarious in the sense that Forrest did the same thing. So why on earth is it so scandalous now? But it is because the the intent behind it. Forrest was doing it to enjoy himself, have fun, and just get into the rhythm. Elvis was, well, Elvis, and he was gonna tease ladies. But I'm gonna move on from that. We could go on an Elvis kick, but maybe later. Now, Forrest does listen. We need to note that because he knows that he should not be taking rides from strangers. So, it's the very first day of school, and the bus is there waiting for him. It's obvious it's a school bus, y'all. There's no question of it, what it's going. But he introduces himself to the bus driver, and this is when he will meet Dorothy Harris for the first time, okay? And this is something here. He knows, when he is told he needs to do something, he knows how to do it. Now, him getting on the bus is, y'all, it's heartbreaking. He's passing all these seats. He sees a few empty ones that he could sit in. Can't sit here. Taken. And all that BS. But then there's a cute little blonde girl. And all she has to say is, you can sit here. And that is the mute cute of the love of his entire life, y'all. That is the love of his whole life. And who is that? That is Jenny. Now, she was a little blonde angel. And this is how Forrest described her. I do remember the first time I heard the sweetest voice in the wide world. I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. She was like an angel. Now, what I love about this, y'all, is that Forrest saw Jenny as angelic and an angel, and she was so beautiful. When the fact is, we're going to learn that maybe her life wasn't so beautiful at all. Okay? Now, one thing that Jenny does that not a lot of people do, she talks to him like he's a person. Now, he has a friend. Now, something that I adore, and I used this when we were Bubba Gumps many years ago, something that he said about him and Jenny. Jenny and me was like peas and carrots. See, Forrest provided her with someone who liked her for her, not what she could provide. And with Jenny's help, Forrest is learning that he is more talented than people give him credit for, obviously besides his mother. Okay? Now, he has a very long career, we'll see later, but in the moment that he starts this hobby that turns into a career, essentially, it's because of Jenny. Now, I'm going to paint the scene for you. Jenny and Forrest are walking down the long road, and there are some boys on bikes. And they're like, oh, we're going to get him, ha, ha, ha. And she goes, run, Forrest, run. And he starts running. Well, once he's running, remember those leg braces he has? They start tearing apart, okay? And when I tell you, he turned into a running fool. Because those braces broke, he outran those bikes. Okay? Those leg braces have now done their job, and he has now really started what he didn't know was going to get him ahead in life. Okay? Now, Forrest has found something he likes. He runs through town. That's just his outlet. That's something he likes to do. Wonderful for you, Forrest. You go, dude. And then we learn some more about Jenny's home life. That's a little bit sad. So one day she doesn't come to school, and Forrest is like, Jenny, you didn't come to school today. And so we learn through Forrest that her daddy was some kind of a farmer. He was a very loving man. He was always kissing and touching her and her sisters. I don't know about you, But if you pair that with the dirty clothes, the torn clothes, and well, the urge to run away from her father, that paints a bad picture to me. Now, her father does stumble out into the cornfields where the kids are. He's holding a partially empty bottle of booze, but luckily the kids are faster than that drunk man, okay? And so they pray and they pray. They are sitting somewhere in that cornfield going, "Dear God, make me a bird so I can fly far, far away from here." Okay? And guess what, y'all? Even though scripted, God heard her. God heard them. Because the police came and told her she didn't have to live there no more. At least according to Forrest. Now, what this tells me, right, is that Forrest was one of the only people really to love her unconditionally for who she was, not for what she could do. And she's a little girl not knowing what she can and can't do, can and cannot do, right? So even though Forrest might be a little different, right? He's still someone in her life that she doesn't have to question what his intent is, does she? She literally can say, "Forrest, I love you," and he would say, "I love you too, Jenny," and because he liked her for who she was. But that being said, just up until this point, one of the things I do adore about this whole thing is that Jenny could have done a lot of things. She could have pushed Forrest away. She could have done all this, but she recognized in Forrest a soulmate. Okay? Someone that she could trust. And that to me is fantastic. Now, we know that Forrest loves Jenny unconditionally, and Jenny loves him. And when Jenny moved away from her dad's house, there were nights where she would sneak over to see Forrest in the middle of the night. And it's just, she cherished him, right? Now, I'm sure you've heard the phrase "run, Forrest, run." Or, better yet, "Run, Forrest, run!" Yeah. And if you haven't, well, you're going to hear it today for sure. And you already have. So we see the high school versions of Jenny and Forrest. Now they're walking down that same road, and they're going to be heckled by what I assume is the same boys that were on the bikes, but now they're in this old truck. Jenny knows exactly what's going to happen, and she just instructs Forrest to run. And run he does. Now, because of this whole situation, he runs himself right into a football career, where that leads to a college career. Something I highly suspect was not on his bucket list. Now, he does let us know that Mama always said God was mysterious. Well, of course he is. God knows the plan, right? Because now Forrest is in college. Forrest is playing college football. And in the first game, he is just a player, y'all. He is not anything special to anybody at first. It doesn't take long for them to realize that he got something. And off the field, we can see that Forrest also has such a different view that it's refreshing, right? So the integration of his college is starting, but the school is hesitant. And as is the governor, who was George Wallace, he was standing by his threat of blocking the doorway to halt this integration ceremony. And what I mean by that is there were several black students trying to enter his school, and he was not having it. But President Kennedy, bigger, higher, had more power than him, was also not having it. And he ordered military force to allow this integration ceremony to proceed. This is why the black students could walk into the school. Now, Forrest is in the corner. He's trying to listen to what's being said, and he is clearly seeing the situation with, how do I put it? He's clearly seeing the situation regardless of the color of somebody's skin. And why do I say that? Well, one of the young lady walking into the school who dropped her notebook, well, she's just walking. She's not stopping. She's not getting heckled. Well, Forrest says, hey, ma'am, you dropped your book. And she grabs it from him. Now, upon seeing this, his authority figures on his team are not happy. But what can they really do? Because Forrest is not just a player on this team, is he? He is such an important player on this team that it no longer says go Alabama. It says go Forrest, and then it has a stop sign. You know who else is holding a stop sign, y'all? The band. Yep. Sure, getting hit once was just more than enough for them, right? And we don't even know how many times they actually got hit. They just got smart about it. Now, this is about the time that, that nurse who was annoyed, justifiably, and tired, she's not happy now. Her bus pulls up, and she's so entranced by Forrest's story that she's a little sad that she has to leave. But she does, because she probably got places to be. And then they take us back to college days, where Forrest is standing in the rain, right? And so Jenny pulls up in a car with a guy. They begin making out. And Forrest only hears, ow, that hurt. He doesn't know anything about the situation. He just knows somebody might be hurting his Jenny. So what does he do? He jumps into action. He goes, opens the guy's front driver's side door, and he starts hitting him. And Jenny's like, oh crap, stop, Forrest. But this dedication is just so unbelievable. And he will always jump to action to save Jenny, no matter what it does for him. Now, this guy who is blindsided, he's justifiably upset. And he leaves. And he writes Jenny off. And I mean, can you blame him in that moment? But Jenny is also a little bit upset because, And I get it. I get why. But she also knows that Forrest is not doing it to just control her. He really thought she was being hurt. And you will never tell me that Jenny does not care about Forrest. But she does get him out of the rain into her dorm room, which, by the way, she goes to an only girls college. Yeah. Now, as they're quietly trying to sit there, her roommate's sleeping, and she has dreams. Jenny dreams of being able to get her voice out to the public, of being listened to and valued for what she has to say and what she thinks. And I'm sure that in her mind there were very few ways to do this. So that's just her dream. How is she going to get this done? And Jenny is one to figure it out. But this next scene is a little bit... she does something that's not so platonic with Forrest, okay? And I'm sure that's probably the first time. She is sitting next to him in her undergarment, right? And he's sitting there drying off with just the robe, her roommate's robe, right? This is important, I promise. And she asks him if he's ever been with a girl. Now, he answers simply that he sits next to them in his home economics class all the time. Now, she takes off her bra, and y'all, he is facing the wall. He's looking at the wall like there's something amazing on it. Locked anywhere but what she is offering him. Until she takes your hand and puts it on herself. Right? Now, he's clearly never had this done or done this, and he does end up ruining the roommate's bathrobe. And Jenny simply breaks the tension by saying, bet that never happened in home ec. And this breaks that tension, y'all, because there is tension. And they both laugh. And that roommate looks scandalized. And if you watch Golden Girls, I feel like this is something that Blanche would say. Bet that never happened in home ec. Anyways, we are now at another football game. And remember, it said go Alabama. It no longer says go Alabama because they're going go Forrest. Stop. And he was so good at playing football that he was on the All-American football team. Now, this team was invited to meet President Kennedy. And for this whole ceremony that was going to be put on TV, live TV, by the way, just so you know, there's a whole buffet of food, drink, and anything you could ever want, as he claims, right? But there was one thing he was interested in, and it was like Dr. Pepper. He must have drank 15 of them. Now, why do I bring up the amount of Dr. Peppers he drinks? It's pertinent, I promise. So, something we have learned is that you get the answer for the question you ask Forrest Gump, right? So, that's probably something the president doesn't know. And so, as they're standing in line, you can see that the Dr. Pepper has kicked in, and Forrest is like, I gotta pee. But the president is asking all the players before him, how does it feel to be an All-American? Right? Seems like a fair question. Now, Forrest gets up to shake his hand, and he is asked, how do you feel? It's Forrest, y'all. It's Forrest. And he goes, I gotta pee. 15 Dr. Peppers will do that. But bless his heart, he was on TV. And this is where he's not embarrassed. He's just like, I said what I said. Now, next we see Forrest washing his hands in the bathroom, and the camera lands on a picture of Marilyn Monroe in the bathroom. What I think is really cool is the Easter eggs that are thrown throughout this movie of things that really did happen with, like, those people surrounding him. And he does tell us about the death of JFK and his brother. But he doesn't dissect it. He doesn't have conspiracy theories. He just simply states them. And it has a slight vibe of empathy, where it's terrible that it happened, but this is what happened, right? Now, we see him graduating from college. Now, that was after playing 5 years of football, which leads me to believe that he definitely had help in his classes because they were going to keep him on that football team. But before he enters this next step of life, there is a very defining instance. After he has graduated, he's standing there with his mama, who's so proud of him, and he is approached by a man asking what he wants to do the next chapter of his life, and he is now looking at an Army recruiting brochure. So, we know that he is looking at an Army recruiting brochure. And what have we said about him multiple times, at least in this episode? He is a man who follows instructions to a T, so he might be good at the Army, right? Well, he questions his choices at first because when he steps onto that bus, he is getting yelled at, berated, and he's like, it's my first day and I'm already being yelled at. What? Did I make the right choice? And not to mention all the seats taken, you can't sit here. And eventually he hears someone say, you can sit down if you want to. Now this is cueing to his future best friend, Benjamin Buford Blue. And then he asks, you ever been on a real shrimp boat? Now, this is where we learn about his shrimping life, but also that everybody calls him Bubba. Like one of those old redneck boys. Can you believe that? And y'all, I can relate to this kind of friendship meet cute. Picture it. 5th grade me sitting in my assigned seat. I get asked by the girl behind me what my favorite animal and actor was. Now, at the time, it was horses, because obviously, I was raised on a horse farm. And Patrick Swayze. Thanks, Dirty Dancing. And from that day, she and I were like peas and carrots. And by that, I mean, you could try and separate us, okay? The teacher tried. She failed. We still talked, okay? We still figured it out. Now, time has taken its toll. We through high school and such, we didn't go to the same high schools. And, we kind of drifted apart. But we came back together. And we just had dinner last week, actually. Now, it did almost take us a year to get this, along with another friend, the third of our trio. Um, but we did it. We were really proud of ourselves. And we were like, we're gonna try and do this in 6 months. So wish us luck. But I digress. Back to Forrest and his new bestie, Bubba. Now, we meet who we meet for a reason at the time we meet them, right? There's a time and a place for everything. There's a reason for everything. Well, we learned that Bubba has come from a shrimping family. Now, whether they were serving the shrimp or they were catching the shrimp, it didn't matter. They were involved in all facets of shrimping. Now, what did I say about Forrest Pride being good in the army because he listens and does what he's told? He was asked what his sole purpose in the army was. And how do you think he answered? To do whatever you tell me, drill sergeant. And then, of course, the drill sergeant is like impressed. That was the most astounding answer his drill sergeant had ever heard. Now, he was a little more stern and probably had, more words to it, but I'm not him, and that's a little bit too much for me. But Forrest has initially found his niche, like his spot. He's good at it. Now, if you watch, look how fast he can take his gun apart and put it back together. According to his drill sergeant, it was a company record, and it would be a waste of resources because he knows that it's not going to do anything for Forrest if he does push him up, for that. But he knows he's impressed. Now, the whole time, guys, Bubba is just talking about shrimp, the way you can cook it, all of this. And for you shrimp lovers, you can take note of the possible recipes you could have. And Forrest never says anything while Bubba seems to be educating him on shrimp. He just listens. Now, up to this point, we hadn't seen much of Jenny in a while, right? She's back. Except now, she is seen photographed in a Playboy magazine in her school sweater. The school obviously threw her out for this, but she wasn't going to be down and out. She was a fighter, she was a survivor, right? Well, she got a call from a man from a club, who saw those photos and offered her a job. Now, if you're Forrest, he is going to see her achieving her dream. She is on stage singing, people are noticing. He doesn't care that she's not fully clothed. He just sees her singing and people listening. Now, somebody else who's not utterly and unconditionally in love with her, she's in a nudie club. And it is a phase of her dream. It's not the ideal thing for her to do. And she knows that. But she has to do what she has to do to survive, right? And this is what she's doing. We know that no one is going to hurt his Jenny, in any form or fashion while he is there. And when a guy in the front is harassing her and throws a drink on her, Forrest sees it. And he's not having it. We know this. And he tries to carry her off the stage, but she refuses him, pushes him away, and he still follows her like a lost puppy dog. Now she is really showing how she feels. Because he says, I love you. And she accuses him of not knowing what love is. We know that he does. But the definition of love that she has is not the same as the definition of love that he has. And we can clearly see that she does not feel worthy of the love he could offer her. Now, in a moment of slight desperation, she looks over the bridge they are standing on, and she quietly asks him if he thinks she could fly. It's not a question of what she's thinking of doing at that moment, because even Forrest knows at that moment she's thinking of doing something permanent. And you can see him trying to figure out what he needs to do when he asks what she means. But he has that look of knowing in his eyes. Now, she's about to leave. She's about to get in a truck and just leave, right? And she tells him, Forrest, you stay away from me, okay? Just stay away from me, please. It's not that she didn't love him. She didn't feel worthy of his love. She didn't love herself, and she didn't feel like she deserved what goodness he had to offer. But before she leaves, he does tell her, like, yeah, I'm going to Vietnam. And she just tells him to run. And she gets in this truck and leaves. Now, as devastating as that is, he's not just losing Jenny. He's losing his mama for the time being. And you can see that it's a lot of stuff, right? But when we're in Vietnam, we see that the first views it's really just a bunch of guys drinking beers and barbecuing, right? And that's probably just one facet, obviously. But that's just the easier side because war hadn't really, like, the battles hadn't really started, probably. Or they were in a time of, you know, safer time in that moment. But I digress. So now, the way that Bubba and Forrest carry their bags, the way they walk, like, you think they could be twins. And that's exactly what Lieutenant Dan Taylor thinks when he meets them. Now, he's this Lieutenant Dan Taylor. You can see who he is with this interaction, this initial interaction. You know he's a take charge kind of guy. He's got sarcastic tendencies, but he has the intention of making sure his men are going to be taken care of. Now, if he doesn't remember little details, we'll forgive him, right? But we also learn that someone in his family has fought and died in every single American war. And he truly believes that this is his destiny, okay? Because he's going to be the one for Vietnam. That's it. That's how it is. He's going to be a hero. And maybe this is an unpopular opinion, maybe not. Whew. He was hot, okay? I don't know, that, like, take charge, I'm going to get it done kind of attitude. Now, they also give us a glimpse into the situation over there because they do take a lot of walks throughout the countryside and they're exploring the area, probably trying to figure out, the best way to do what they need to do. And to see how Forrest talks about the men in his group, and pardon me for not knowing the proper terms, I'm not military oriented, but he sees some of the best, right? He's telling us they're some of the best. And you're looking at them, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're not the best, but they look terrified young men, not sure what this is going to bring, if they're ever going to make it home, but they're determined to make it work because that is what they do. Right? And that is awesome. And Forrest is going to see the best in them. Right? And then the rain starts. Yes, you heard me right. Forrest lets us know that it will rain and has rained for 4 months straight. Now, granted, that makes it a little bit easier maybe to not have a battle, but now is the time during all these 4 months of rain where Forrest and Bubba begin making plans for their future. I say their future because they are a good partnership, because they be watching out for one another like brothers, according to Bubba. So Bubba asks Forrest, as they're standing in this, like, almost neck deep water, if he wants to go into the shrimping business with him. And Forrest agreed that it was a fine idea. So now they have made plans when they get back home. And Forrest makes sure that Jenny does know what's going on in his life. And he does send several letters a week. But Jenny is living the life of a gypsy, right? She's going off, she's doing whatever she wants, whenever she wants, however she wants. And that's her way of controlling her life. That's her destiny, right? But 4 months of rain, and one day it just stops. The rain is done, they're walking, and then they are in the battle that is going to determine life or death. Okay. Unfortunately, several of the men of their group died instantly. But Forrest did what he does best, and he listened to instructions given to him by both Bubba and Lieutenant Dan, because they both told him to run. And boy, did he run. But he ran so far and so fast that he was all alone. And as we know how he feels about Jenny, well, Bubba's his best good friend. So he was going to go back and find Bubba. And so he would run back, and other men from his little group would be calling out to him. So he would carry those men to the safety zone. And the amount of strength it had to have taken this man to carry fully grown men to safety is amazing. Now, I did get a question answered because I was genuinely curious as to what do you have to do to be able to carry somebody like that? And the answer I got was a lot of body carrying exercises. All right. That is interesting. But makes a lot of sense, especially in such a zone. But there's one man that is not thrilled about leaving his platoon and not fulfilling his destiny. You want to guess? Anybody want to guess? It's Lieutenant Dan. Now, he carries Lieutenant Dan to safety. Actually, I think it ends up dragging him because there are parts. Well, Lieutenant Dan is shooting people. And as he goes to leave Lieutenant Dan in the safety zone, Lieutenant Dan is like, no, man, like, I called for an airstrike. You better stay. But one thing is clear. Bubba is coming home from Vietnam. Whether he's returning in a body bag or he is walking home, he is going home. And finally, Forrest does find Bubba. But unfortunately, his best good friend was mortally wounded. And you can see that Forrest knows exactly what's happening here. But he is stoic, and he picks him up, and he's terrified. But he gets them all to safety, and they are sitting there. This airstrike has gone down, and Bubba looks at him and asks, Forrest, why did this happen? And Forrest just tells him, you were shot. And then he tells him, I want to go home. Now, the sad part about this is not only that he lost his best good friend, right? Not just that. But there are moments where you can tell that Forrest knows he's different. And maybe not in the best way, because he says, Bubba was my best good friend, and even I know that ain't something you can just find around the corner. What that means to me is that he knows that there's something not 100% right with him. But he lost Bubba, right? And this part is hard for Forrest, understandably so. Much harder than the rest because he closes that chapter firmly but quietly. Now, when we go back, to that time frame, because they do go back to Savannah for a moment, we learn that Forrest was actually wounded during this whole escapade. He was shot in the butt, which they called $1 million wound. Which he's like, I never saw a lick of that money. But we also see that Lieutenant Dan is not adapting well to the loss of his legs. And who can blame him? Now, he felt he had a destiny, he had a family legacy to live up to, and he couldn't. Not to mention, a lot of his men had died in battle, and they weren't coming home. And survivor's guilt, y'all, it's a real thing. Now, I know I've said it, I'll keep saying it because I fully believe it. This man listens. When if someone offers to teach him to play ping pong, he becomes a duck in water, And we reach this crucial moment when Lieutenant Dan breaks and pulls Forrest from his bed in the middle of the night. Now, Forrest isn't fighting. That's just Forrest. And Lieutenant Dan is just raving and ranting. He's upset. And finally, he asks the question that is so crucial that it's crucial. He says, do you know what it's like to not be able to use your legs? And Forrest just kind of looks at him. His eyes are big and wide, like, yes, sir, I do. And here's the thing. If Forrest had fought or said something else, he would have continued to put allowed Lieutenant Dan to get more upset and be more ranting and raving, right? But this takes the wind out of his sails because we really have to understand that he feels useless. What is he? He's a man with no legs, right? He had a destiny. He was Lieutenant Dan Taylor. But sometimes we have to hear from others what we already know. And Forrest tells him so. You still Lieutenant Dan. Lieutenant Dan had to be reminded that just because he didn't die with his men does not mean that he wasn't meant, he wasn't useful, right? Now, Lieutenant Dan has done a lot of great things for his troops, right? His people, his whatever, how you want to put that. But Forrest, due to his heroic actions, is awarded the Medal of Honor. Now he's super excited about this because you can tell he doesn't expect anything for saving those men. He just did it because it was right. And then he meets another president who doesn't know Forrest. Because the president makes a comment about wanting to see the wounded area on live TV. Now, you remember he was shot in the buttocks, right? Well, guess what? Forrest showed him. Yeah. And the president is like, wow. Okie dokie then. But what this tells us about Forrest that I absolutely adore and I will never stop talking about or thinking is that he is the type of person that you get what you see. He does not offer false narratives. He is legitimately the person that you see. And I absolutely adore that about him. And the fact that he has people in his life that are willing to, how do I put this, support him in ways that he didn't even know he needed to succeed, that's even better. Buttercups, we are going to go ahead and stop here. It is a 2-hour movie, and I want to be able to give you my insights and not keep you for 3 hours or so. But what do you think of the dynamic between Forrest and the people that he cares about? His mother, Jenny, Bubba, all that. What do you think? What are your thoughts on Forrest? Like, let me know. I want to hear them. So you can send them to harktisthetbell@gmail.com. You can comment on Facebook or YouTube, or you can just send me an email and I will be glad to read them. But other than that, Buttercups, I look forward to seeing you next week, and I hope you are having a good week. Bye.